Okay, I think we'll make a start now. Um, so I'd just like to begin by acknowledging that we're all living and working on the lands of traditional owners. I'm speaking from the land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, as well as any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander colleagues who have joined us today. And also to acknowledge that you're all living and working on the lands of traditional owners too. My name is Charlene Edwards. I'm the Executive Officer at the Melbourne Social Equity Institute, and this seminar today is being presented jointly by the Social Equity Institute as well as our colleagues at the Melbourne Alliance to End Violence Against Women and Their Children. This seminar is being recorded and will be shared on both the MAEVe and MSEI websites after the event. It is my great pleasure to introduce today Dalal Smiley, who is the CEO of Wellsprings for Women, which is based in Dandenong. Wellsprings offers services, supports and programs for women to improve education, employment, health and well-being. I'd also like to introduce Mohajer Hameed, who's the co-presenter today. He holds a Master's of Psychoanalysis and a PhD in Developmental Psychopathology. That's a mouthful. He's currently a research fellow within the University of Melbourne's Safer Families Centre of Research Excellence. Dalal and Mohajer will be speaking about the work that they have conducted together, which was supported by the Melbourne Social Equity Institute's Community Fellows Program. Now, Dalal was part of our third cohort of fellows that commenced in 2018. The fellowships are designed to support community organisations to undertake their own research, supported by an academic mentor at the University of Melbourne. So today we are going to hear about the outcomes of the work that they've undertaken together. I'm now going to hand over to Mohajer, who will talk about the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone, and welcome everyone to MSCI MAEVe Core Badge Seminar. My name is Mohajer Hameed, and I am a research fellow within Safer Families Centre of Research Excellence and work very closely with Professor Kelsey Hegarty. The PowerPoint stopped. May I just stop share and share again? Is that visible to everyone? Okay. Now, before we start from my position and on behalf of Dalal Smiley as well, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respect to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present with us. Today, Dalal, our community research fellow, and I will be sharing with you our research experiences about engaging men. Dalal will give you an overview of the Community Research Fellowship, including the aims and objectives of the project. I'll then briefly provide an overview of the research methodology, and then Dalal will share with you some of the preliminary findings, and we'll have some time for discussion, question and answer. Now, over the last about 2 years working within academic research environment, on average, almost 50% of my time have been focused on research projects about engaging men. For example, working very closely with Kelsey Hegarty, I coordinated the Better Man project in collaboration with our industry partner, No to Violence. Now, this project engaged over 150 men in an online environment. Also been involved in biofeedback project, closely working with Laura Tatsia, which focuses on the physiological and environmental triggers associated with men who use intimate partner violence. In addition, through several research student-focused projects, we've explored GPs, health practitioners' perspectives about addressing IPV with men from migrant and refugee communities. In addition to systematically reviewing the health characteristics of men who use violence in intimate relationships. Now, following this brief introduction, the topic for this community research fellowship sits within this broad theme of engaging men and focuses on men's perspectives on gender roles, and processes of change through migration. We are very delighted to have had this research opportunity through the Community Research Fellowship, and I will now hand over back to Dalal to take you through her learning experiences with this project.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to present to you today, even though we can't see you, but we know you can hear us and see us. So I'm the CEO at Wellsprings for Women. I started there in about 3.5 years ago. And Wellsprings for Women is a women-only neighborhood house, and we provide education, adult education, to the majority of our clients, women from migrant and refugee backgrounds. And we provide them, apart from literacy and numeracy courses, a lot of support services for them, for women, especially women who are impacted by isolation, mental health, poverty, homelessness, or family violence. Next, Mohajer. So we have our approach to working with women is based on human rights principles, and we take the approach of having seeing education from a holistic point of view. So trying to meet the needs of the women and addressing the barriers they might experience in engaging with us in their education. We support them by providing a women-only safe environment. Many of them wouldn't been able to attend our center if it wasn't women-only. We provide them with child minding because we know that childcare is a big barrier to women in coming out of their home and engaging in any programs out there. And we have a range of services, like our home visitation program, where we go out there and visit women who are isolated. And we do that through allocating them a trained volunteer. We do a lot of advocacy, and we do a lot of supported referrals. Next. So background to our community research project. This started when we were doing a lot of education programs with women on gender equality, prevention of family violence, respectful relationships. Well, we've been doing a lot of that awareness raising with women for the last at least 3 years. As a result of that, the women themselves kept saying to us, look, this is great that we're having this opportunity to engage in those discussions and those conversations, but nobody is talking to our men on these issues either. So they wanted to find out whether there's anything out there that engages men in those same conversations. So we started to look around and explore who's doing that sort of work. And we found that there was nothing really to engage men in the prevention space or in gender equality. All of the programs targeting men were related to perpetrators or behavioral change programs. So seeing that we are a women-only organization, we started taking very small steps in engaging migrant refugee men outside of our normal working hours because we needed to maintain safe space for women, and just to consult them on what's going on, how do we actually get this conversation started. So we started having this small conversation with a group of migrant and refugee men since 2018. So that led us to looking at the opportunity to do the community research project and to find out, more about what's going on and to get some expertise from Melbourne University, and we applied for that and we were successful. So our partners then have been Charlene from the Melbourne Social Equity Institute, and Dr. Mohajer Hameed from the Safer Families Center of Research Excellence. So the aim of our research is to explore the views and perspective of men from refugee and migrant background in Victoria about their understanding and perception of what gender roles are. And then as a result of their migration to Australia, how these perceptions have changed over time, and what's been in the course of their settlement in Australia, how these perceptions, understanding of gender roles have changed, if they have changed. So the research, Mohajer, that's yours.
That's back to me. Yep. Okay. Thanks, Dalal. I would briefly provide an overview of the research methodology for this community research fellowship, in particular with reference to Dalal's learning experiences. Dalal was involved in preparing the ethics application and submission to Melbourne University Human Research Ethics. She successfully engaged in learning about writing ethics application and responding to reviewers. After getting ethics approval, Dalal engaged in recruiting potential participants by distributing the recruitment flyer via community networks with the communities in the Dandenong and Cardinia area, in particular with communities from refugee and immigrant backgrounds. She had some experience with snowballing technique for participant recruitment. Now, we were successful in recruiting about 12 men from migrant and refugee backgrounds. And in terms of data collection, Dalal co-facilitated 2 focus group interviews face-to-face with each lasting about 2 hours. So for this project, we collected around 4 hours of focus group conversation, and Dalal have engaged in the initial stages of qualitative analysis and involved in some preliminary data analysis focusing on identifying common themes. Now, our aim is to further analyze and write the results as a publication. So overall, we engaged 12 men from migrant and refugee backgrounds. The country of birth of the participants that we engaged included Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, and Sudan. The men were between 25 and 53 years of age. And it was amazing that in the room, we engaged men that, in addition to the language of English, as a group, we had men who also spoke either Arabic, Dari, Hindi, Hazarji, Mandarin. We had one participant also speaking Mandarin, Punjabi, Persian, Shilluk, as well as Urdu. Now, with this sample description, I now hand back over to Dalal to present some of the key findings.
So we looked at pre-migration perspectives on gender roles, what was their understanding before coming to Australia, and how these have changed in post-migration, and changing gender roles and relations between men and women, how these things have changed, what's helped that change to occur.
Yeah.
I think it was very important for us that the men's voices are heard in this research. So that's why it was important that we chose all these quotes that actually reflect exactly what they have said to us. So in terms of before migration, all of them talked about how men and women have very defined roles and responsibilities from their perspective, from their respective countries and cultures. So in our culture and our society where we lived, most of work the women can't do. For example, the man is doing very hard job. Men can't wash the clothes in our country. So that's a reflection, one example of a quote that talks about the rigid roles, if you like, delineation between men and women. Next. And many of them also talked about the fact that they spend it, because in their journey to Australia and because many of them are refugees, that their refugee experience reinforces those roles as well, because they spend a lot of time in refugee camps or in countries where, again, those roles are very rigid. So that kind of reliance on the men to be, the key person driving the family is reinforced throughout their refugee journey. So this is a more quotes where one says, you know, I don't believe that women can't do anything. Women can do everything, but in my society, there is some culture value, or there is some Islamic point of view where the women can't do anything. People, when they come from Afghanistan and Pakistan, they are coming with the same mind in this country. And the second quote kind of like counters the first one, where someone, you know, didn't like the fact that this is what this person sees as being an Islamic point, an Islamic issue. Says that it's more really a cultural factor that come into play rather than it is an Islamic law. Next. So again, we're still talking about the perceptions before migration. So in our society, the role of men is many things. They are working, they are fighting, they are bringing everything. They are standing in election, they are playing everything. One thing, when we come here, we are coming without any education, without any language. We don't have any experience. Another one, I think our community is divided on gender equality. Most of the people say that gender roles should be like back home. So that's the kind of struggle and challenge when migrant refugee communities come to Australia and you know, being confronted with Western points of view, Western society. Some are open to change, and some, you know, try to hold on to what they know best and what their culture and understanding of gender roles has been. So our belief is that our daughter should go clean and wash all those things. If we have a son of same age, he can stay playing, and we are not saying anything to him. So I think in our community, men still have that traditional view of men as a provider, protector, and women working in the kitchen at home. This concept is quite prevalent. Okay, so that's what a lot of them have talked about, and I don't think anything new, that you would all know that, you know, patriarchy is across our world to many different degrees. In post-migration, when many of our refugee migrant communities come to Australia, so they think that life can continue as it is. So we bring our family here and think that they should do same thing like they did in the past. But everything is different when we come. In our culture, the men are very much under pressure because they have to pay the mortgage, you have to pay the utility bills, you have to work very hard. Next. But some of them, you know, reflected on the fact that when they come to Australia and see the situation and the status of women in Australia, how things change so much for them, that they feel like women really become more dominant because they become more liberal, they have more freedom, and they can talk about their rights, and they can get a divorce if they want to. These are major things for many of them that were not the same as in their country of birth. So we are living here and our family is living overseas. So there is that kind of still that connection with family overseas, who is still living in with different ways of operating than what the adjustments they have to make here in Australia. So here, because of necessity, they find themselves they're having to wash their clothes or make their own food, cook for their friends. So their mentality is slowly changing. And some of the men are actually single, so they're talking about when they were living as single men. Next. So the women have more opportunity here. And they said that they have, you know, have the experienced women, they're coming, saying about their rights, and they're asking for more rights. They don't want the extended family environment again, so they just want to live with husbands and kids, no brother-in-law or any in-laws. That's a big factor in many of the refugee migrant families who say to us how the pressures of the extended family, even though there are a lot of support networks and support that comes from being in an extended family, but it also brings with it other pressures as well. in terms of gender roles. Next. So so we were interested to find out how change has come into their understanding of gender roles. So one quote is that these misconceptions can be changed through interaction with other cultures. It doesn't have to be one culture. If you interact from a different culture, you try and question your view, which you never question back in your country. So there was many quotes talking about how if they come to Australia and they are exposed to other cultures, other communities, they're listening, they're observing, they're involved in discussions, how slowly their notion of what gender is does actually start to change, and they can embrace that change. And is in comparison to communities who perhaps remain isolated within their own community, where those kind of understanding of gender keeps getting perpetuated and reinforced within that community. But if they are exposed to other groups, it does have a positive impact. Next. Yeah, so again, it's about, they're talking about, you know, the benefit of interacting with other cultures and how that helps them to start to think differently. And also the other thing that has helped them in changing their understanding of gender is that if the transition from what they understood before to the new understanding, if it happens in at a slow pace, that not, you know, straight away or in a, you know, quickly or fast, but that they're given the time to do that adjustment, to think and reflect and take it all in, rather than sometimes they feel like they're expected the minute they come to Australia to sort of suddenly become someone else and understand these gender issues in a different way. So if they are given that time, and if they've got that time to think and reflect and take on those changes, that they do embrace it more positively. Thanks, Mohajer. Yeah. And one said that they found that in communities who are well coordinated, that the couples manage to find good positive role models. They stay together, and because somebody can just take your hand and say to you, you'll be all right, this is how we all survive. Yeah, so having that support from other migrants and refugees who have been through the same experience, who can share that experience and reassure them, you know, of things that the sky is not going to fall, you know, on you because you're going to embrace new gender roles, basically. Yeah, Mohajer.
Okay. I'll cover some of this.
Yeah.
So this project was a very a small scale exploratory study, yet it actually provided a good opportunity for Dalal as a community research fellow to learn and develop some basic research skills. Although we used open-ended, semi-structured interview guide and tried to create a safe environment, a safe space for men to express their opinions, to express their views and perspectives, there's always a potential of interviewer bias. Now, having said that, this project identified some, we think, critical gaps and areas of concerns faced by participants' ethnic communities. We put this together as reflective points, and some of our participants reflected on major issues facing their communities, including breakdown of relationships, intimate relationships, family violence, loss of connection with extended families. Also, there were some positive reflections overall in terms of building on positive stories of men, discovering hidden strengths of women, as well as community-driven solutions. Now, these are only reflective points, and in no way we could have explored this in more depth. Now, due to the very small scale of the project. However, these were some of participants' reflections when we we started discussing and talking about issues that need to be addressed within their communities. Dalal, would you like to add anything else here based on your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, they talked a lot about the impact of the change in gender roles leading to, you know, separation and divorce and family violence, and that these things happen because they haven't, you know, a lot of the couples haven't had that support for both men and women to work together about making that adjustment. That the women, because the women, the men feel that the women have had a lot to gain and that the men have had a lot to lose as a result. But they see this, that if they were supported in that process, that these things could have avoided the negative consequences. I think the positive impact has been where the men have said, we didn't know that our women can do all these things. And that's where that hidden strength of women came through. And also some men have seen the positives of this because they said, well, suddenly we don't feel like we are the sole breadwinners and that everything falls on our shoulder, that this role can be shared with our wife and we both can be the ones bringing income into the family. So it's like a lot of weight gone off their shoulders. So some men have seen the positives of this.
Right. At this stage, we might open the room for any comments, questions that you might have.
Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box and I'll moderate that. While we're waiting for people to have a think about questions they'd like to ask you, I have one. And I was wondering, I think your research is really, it's fascinating. And I just wondered whether there were differences in views for people who had been here in Australia for longer than those who had arrived a bit more recently, or if there were any differences in views according to people's age.
I think there was one of the participants was really, like when Mohajer and I were talking about it, was sort of the outlier. He has been here not long, but his upbringing was a bit more liberal. He actually was the only one in the group who had no issue at all with the changing of roles. And he said that his wife is the main breadwinner. He's happy to just have to be at home, look after the kids and be the part-time worker to assist with the family. But he had no issues with that. And that he actually prefers it. He actually sees that he can be, he's at his best if he's at home looking after the kids. I think his situation was a bit unique from the others, even though he had been here less time, but his family, he comes from a family that had those principles and values as well. So he saw that in his own family. And he said that they were a bit, unique in that way. Some of the others, it was more about not so much how long they've been here, but how also they adhered, they felt strongly about their culture and their understanding of gender from their cultural point of view. I didn't detect much in terms of, unless Mohajer, you want to comment on that, if we didn't look at that specifically.
Yeah, I think it's a great point to make here, that because of the small scale study, and we only engaged 12 men, and as you can see, we had some participants been here as minimum as like 3 months to many years. It's great to factor that into analysis, but with 2 focus group interviews, we really can't separate out the perspectives of men who've been migrated recently or those who have been here for longer period of time. But great points to consider for future research.
Great. Thank you. So we have quite a few questions that have come in now. So our first question is in two parts. So how do you separate between what is defined as cultural influence and Islamic influence? And to what extent, based on your findings, is the interaction with the Multicultural Society of Australia affect their perspective on gender roles?
Okay, I'll give it a go. Mohajer, you might want to come in. I think you know, like there is no consensus on this issue. I mean, they can use whichever way. You will find that some will use religion itself and verses from the Quran or whatever to delineate between the roles, and others will dispute that and dispute their understanding of what the Quran might say, and they will say, well, you know, it's given women equality and we are the first religion to give them the vote, and that equality and sameness is an issue that is contested all the time, that we're not talking about sameness, but we are talking about equality and valuing the roles. So they seem to be more settled around that notion that we're not saying that men and women are the same, but we are actually saying that they have equal value from a religious point of view, or if, but the culture seems to be more what influences the patriarchal behaviors.
Yeah, I think just to add, and this is reflection, in no way we investigated the role of religion, and in a broader sense, the role of religion and the intersection of religion and gender roles, or the role of religion in intimate partner violence, if any. But it was like superficially that some men raised some of these issues, and there can be a discrepancy between the religious principles and what's on the ground and the reality at a societal level. Now, how can we differentiate between religion and cultural factors? That's beyond the scope of, you know, this project. But clearly, some of the participants were saying, yes, in my religion, it is clearly stated that men and women are equal in terms of their behavior. If you think about their reward system, they are the same, exactly equal. But when it comes to practice, people are not practicing those principles. But again, it's a very interesting point, but way beyond the scope of this project.
Okay, thank you. The next question, have you come across any research with young people or young men from refugee migrant backgrounds around perspectives on gender roles? If so, are there any indications of similar findings?
No, not that we know of. We haven't come across that in Australia. Yeah, Mohajer, you did quite a bit yourself in looking at various research. You might want to.
Yeah, not so much from a research point of view, because this might be an emerging field of research, but perhaps from a clinical point of view and my engagement with members from my own community, that there is a huge discrepancy. There's a huge difference between the perception of gender roles from, you know, young people raised in Australia within migrant families. And perhaps this discrepancy could be a trigger or one of the many factors that lead to conflicts and perhaps violence, teenagers towards their parents, perhaps, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, on to the next question. So, great presentation, Mohajer and Dalal. I am interested in the reflection that men feel like losers and women as winners. Building on the other reflection that women have hidden strengths, did any of the men talk about the benefits of men and women working together as a team rather than as being competing for power as winners or losers might imply?
Dalal, I remember, if you could reflect on one of the participants' own story when he came and his partner started working and then he realized. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yes, there was one of the participants who talked about how he came as an asylum seeker here, I bought, first, and the wife was still overseas, and he was supporting her with money, but at some stage he had no more money to support. And he was so worried that what's going to happen to his wife and children. And then his wife wrote to him, said that she's actually started to do tutoring and teaching, and that slowly, she was able to support herself and her children. He was absolutely like, couldn't believe it. He says, "Oh, I can't believe that my wife is able to do that and able to support herself and her children and didn't necessarily rely on him entirely." So that's, slowly with the necessity of things, they found that they could adjust and do certain things themselves. And also their wife, and partner is able to also support herself under those kind of circumstances. So when they talked about how they had to cook and wash clothes and all that, it was out of that necessity of having to do it, that the circumstances forced them to do it, and they found that they can do it. It's not that impossible. The other thing was about them recognizing also in Australia that the financial pressures, the economic pressures meant that it was right that both can share that responsibility, and that husband and wife can both work and still support the family together. So yes, those things were there. They were discovered through the change of circumstances, and they've kind of embraced that change.
Yeah, and I reflect talking with one of the men just after when we finished and had the informal conversation and talking about gender roles. And one said that that if you want to clap hands, you need two hands to clap. You can't clap with one hand. And this was his metaphor of men and women working together, that you need both, to clap, to work together. I found that an interesting reflection.
Mm-hmm. We have lots of questions to get through. So just moving over to the chat, there's some questions there. So what is the hardest thing for men to accept regarding new gender norms after migration in Australia?
I think it's that position of leadership, being the head of the family, is something that cuts deep into their psyche. They still want to feel like they are the go-to person in the family. That's what I gathered, from, and not just from this research, but when I'm responding to these questions, I'm also, taking from other conversations we've had leading up to this research as well, is the fact that, some men have said to me, look, we were treated like kings. We were like kings in our community back home. And I come here and we no longer have that role or that status. And suddenly, sometimes we are at the bottom of the hierarchy in Australia, where women come first, children next, the dog and the cat, and then the men. That's one of the comments I've heard. So yeah, so not having that being the center of what the family is all about, suddenly they feel they are no longer that. They have to consider, everybody else's views and implement more like a democratic sort of system in the family, a shared decision making. They're not used to that. That's not how they're brought up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mohajer, did you want to add to that at all?
I think, and some of the men reflected on the fact of time, that, if we use the metaphor of any behavior, we look at the pattern of behavior that has existed for years, and you want to change that. It does not happen suddenly or quickly. It will take time. So their transition, one of the participants reflected on a slow transition, so that the mentality, the attitudes will change gradually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So I wonder if the participants spoke about what their children, teenagers learn at school, for example, sex education, and how they feel about that.
I don't think we went into that specifically. There were discussions about children's rights, you know, how children talk about their own rights in the family and things like that. And there were talks about using physical punishment, you know, how they used to discipline their children, how this has changed here, and that, you know, the children are very well informed about their rights and can threaten the family if, you know, if they use any form of discipline. Not in this discussion, but in another discussion, I remember one of the men saying to me that in where he came from, you know, they used to discipline or punish the children, punish his children by smacking them. You know, he said here, we're told we can't do that, but if we don't know any other method of disciplining our children, then we no longer know how to discipline them, and then they're off and doing all the wrong things, and then DHHS comes in and tells us off because we're not, you know, they take our children away, not knowing that we no longer had any other means. We don't know how else to do it. So it's kind of like being between a rock and a hard place. Yeah. So while we tell them what not to do, we're not providing families with alternative ways we're not supporting them in parenting.
So this is slightly changing tact, but from this study, what further research would you like to see? Larger sample size, question mark, etc.
Yes, we do have some recommendations, don't we, Mohajer, about that?
Yeah, let's move on to that. This slide. You could go through, Dalal.
So this came from the men themselves, that what would work is that is a community-led, designed, implemented support and education programs for migrant and refugee families on gender equality, respectful relationship, and prevention of family violence. And we, from our, you know, as researchers, we would like to see more faith-based understanding of gender and how to reconcile with concept of gender equality as further research, and exploring concept of healthy masculinities amongst migrant and refugee men.
Yeah, these are some of the areas for, you know, future consideration, and obviously the list can go, but these were some of the things that the participants told us.
Great. Okay, and I think you've just answered quite a few questions just in those recommendations. So another question is, did access to technology such as smartphones, were they discussed in terms of looking for support information or information about the way of life in Australia?
No, nothing to do with technology. It doesn't work like that. I think with most migrant communities, it's their community, it's their networks, it's that social connection that helps them to adjust in their settlement here, in making those adjustments. It's that human connection. Yeah.
That's right. And we didn't raise the topic of technology and how technology is situated in their help seeking or in their information gathering. But as Dalal was saying, the emphasis was more on social connections, interpersonal connections, and gaining help from a person within the community with already established good level of trust and connection.
Thank you. So we've got another question. So it's obviously all communities are different, and of course there are sub-communities, etc. But did you get any feeling as to what the enablers may be that contribute towards gender equality?
Yeah, I think we talked a bit about that. It's the enablers have been, first of all, the change in circumstances, the economic necessity, the circumstances of life in Australia forced them to make those changes. So They don't have, if they're coming here as single men, they don't have their mom and their sisters and their cousins or anyone to help them. They've had to do their own washing, their own cooking. And that actually drove some of that change. The other enabler has been the economic situation in Australia, where one income is not enough for them to meet all their financial needs. So having their wife, or partner going out and working and contributing to the finances has also been another enabler. And the connections with their community, where there's been positive examples of transition to understanding gender roles in a different way, seeing other positive examples in the community where this has worked, has also been a great enabler. And connecting with different cultures and listening to other cultures, and that kind of interaction help them to open their mind to new understandings.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I might just add the motivation of the men to have the family together, family connectedness, and having the children together, working together. I think we sensed these elements, the togetherness and supporting each other, through whether it's economic disadvantage or working together. That sense of togetherness, I think, was as a mental enabler. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Lots of questions. I'm hoping we get through them all in the next couple of minutes. So this is an interesting one. So I'm wondering about the issue of racism and how that was discussed in relation to masculinity and gender roles. In other words, if the men experienced racism, did this affect their views of gender roles, masculinity and power, and their use of violence?
Mohajer, have we touched on that? Yeah.
I think yeah, that's a really big question, and I'm thankful to the person who raised it. But did we talk? I think we did not sort of touch on this in depth, the issue of racism. Our focus was really on their perception of gender roles and their expectations, and how their perception of gender roles have changed throughout their migration. But can you reflect on?
I think we didn't actually raise or ask any questions related to racism ourselves, but the men themselves talked about discrimination and racism that they face in the community as part of the general discussion about what are some of the challenges that the men face in Australia. This was just touched on, but it wasn't really, it wasn't the scope of this research to go into that. We wanted to focus, with the short time we had, we really had a lot of questions to focus on, really like their perception of gender roles and what's helped to that transition. But yeah, it's just another layer, if you like, of challenges that they face in Australia. And some of them, it's more within their own community, it's not so much racism, but it's more about when men are trying to make those adjustments, what is the reaction of other men in their community to them? So what is sometimes a barrier to change is that they feel other men put them down or diminish them because they're making that change, or they're washing the dishes, or they're letting their wives go to work or something like that. Sometimes the reaction from other men or other women sometimes in their community can be a negative reaction, which tend to let some men do these adjustments in private, but in public, they put on another facade. Yeah, that was an issue that was raised.
Yeah. Okay. So was the study able to ascertain a time frame with regards to the length of time and support when men were given time to integrate and synthesize the changes in attitudes to gender roles?
did they specifically say how long it would take? They didn't specify a time, but it was more about saying that they need time. So it might, for some, it might be a year, 2 years, but yeah, and it's going to differ from one situation, one individual to another, as long as it's not like, you know, for some, like they felt that when they arrive here, and remembering that when they arrive in Australia, they have so many other settlement issues to deal with. And their mind is into that survival issue of getting a job, getting a house, you know, that sort of stuff. And they need that time to settle before they can even think about this gender issues or the adjustments. So, you know, yeah, allowing time, but we didn't really ask them, well, how long, what do you think is enough time? Yeah.
Building from your information that shows men's experiences prior to arrival, for example, in refugee camps, impact their perception of roles and responsibilities in Australia, was there any difference between men who migrated and those who came from refugee backgrounds?
Yeah, look, I think definitely the men who have been in war situations and refugee camps tend to have different experience than people who have migrated, especially that we know, not necessarily just from this focus group, but in general, we know that the migration experience is very different from a refugee experience, and that migrants choose to come to the country that they want to go to, while refugees don't. And for some of the migrants, you know, depending which country they are coming from, they have more information, more idea about what they're getting into when they come to Australia and the different society they're coming into, where for refugees is really a much more challenging journey for them. Yeah.
All right, we've got 4 questions and let's see if we can do it. So Australia is very multicultural. Do the men look at the gender relations in other migrant refugee communities, especially ones that have been here longer?
Yeah, and I think that was touched on is about when they interact with different cultural groups while they're here, and they see that how other cultural groups have made those adjustments, and they can see that things have been positive in terms of those changes. That was clearly discussed in that focus group, and they brought it up about what would help them to make those adjustments is seeing other migrants and refugees who have come here before them, have been here longer, how their life has unfolded and how their families been able to adjust. And that is a very powerful example for them to learn from. Yeah.
Okay, so do you think some men would be okay with their wife being more equal, sharing the decision making, etc., but they are scared of the judgment of their community? So it may be okay at an individual level, but frowned upon at a community level.
Yeah, and I think that when we were doing this, we were thinking about how do you alleviate that pressure in the community? You know, what do you say to other men who put their fellow men down when they are making those kind of adjustments, and not to be judgmental towards them? And one guy said to us that when the one who actually chose to be at home and do the work, he said, I asked him that question about the reaction from other men. He said to me that he was surprised that most of the negative reaction have come from the women themselves, not the men. He said the women said, you know, like, yeah, like they would be sort of looking down on him or on the women, like why would, on his wife saying, why would she allow that to happen or something like that. So it's, you know what I mean? Like it's, the reaction is not just necessarily only from the men. Apparently it's also coming from the women themselves who frowned upon that situation. So helping communities to see that's the education that we constantly need to be doing, is having those conversations with communities about this, and and supporting the ones who are embracing that change to feel supported in that transition, rather than having to put up with, you know, those kind of attitudes from that.
Okay, so what is the faith-based approach of understanding about toxic masculinity you have in mind based on your recommendations?
Oh, can you repeat that one? What's the faith-based
approach of understanding about toxic masculinity you have in mind based on your recommendation? So I think in your recommendations at the end, you talk about a faith-based understanding of gender and how to reconcile with concepts of gender equality. I think the person who's asking the question is maybe asking for you to elaborate on that.
Okay. The reason we put this in is, for most faith-based community, or, you know, talking to many religious leaders or whatever, the issue for them is they're very comfortable with respectful relationships. They're very comfortable with prevention of family violence. The challenge is around gender. And what is gender? What is gender diversity? What is equality? They have a lot of difficulty and struggles with that. And it needs to be done from a faith-based understanding of looking at, and we don't know the answer, that's why it's there, because we need to find out more about that.
Yeah.
What's the issue there? How do we reconcile? Because sometimes a lot of barrier to gender equality, it sits in that paradigm of religion, is how do people who embrace a certain faith and also you know, want to raise their children here and in a society that promotes gender equality, how they're going to do that and feel comfortable and not really compromised about this issue. I think that discussion hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say we are very close to 2 o'clock, and I know lots of people have other Zoom meetings to run off to. I'd just like to thank both Dalal and Mohajer for sharing their work. It's inspiring, and I really hope that you're able to build upon what you've created today. I'd also like just to very quickly mention that the Community Fellows program that Dalal has been a part of, we're open for applications at the moment, and the application deadline is October the 23rd. So please, you know, if there are any community organisations out there, take a look at our website, because this is so Dalal should be our poster person for, you know, what a community fellow looks like. So someone who really has been able to embrace the opportunity to build her own skills up and to produce some really interesting findings. We do have some questions that have remained unanswered. We'll download the chat and the questions, and I'll pass them on to Dalal and Mohajer to see if we can get some answers out to people. But in the meantime, I'd just like to thank everyone for their participation in this webinar. It's very sad that we're not all in a room together and have the chance to chat informally after this. Yes, thank you for your interest and your questions. I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you again, Dalal and Mohajer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks very much, Charlene and Mohajer, for this.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.